Good afternoon. My name is Bill Pollack, and my guest today is friend is Bill Huth, and both of us have been involved in Willow Springs, which is one of the premier racing establishments in the south part of California. It's November 18th, 2009, and we're at the Peterson Museum, and it's a beautiful day, and Bill just drove in from the desert where Willow is, and we're going to talk a little bit about what happened back in the 50s and how this great race course got started. Good to have you here, Bill.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and I'll probably find out more than you will when I'm done questioning.
I was, in those early days, which is back in the early 50s, I was involved with the California Sports Car Club, and I was racing cars and raising a family and doing all the crazy things we do, and I was president of the sports car club at that time. And one day, this man walked in, a big tall guy, and announced that his name was Harold Matheson, and that he had some land out in Willow Springs. And I said, well, where's Willow Springs? He says, well, do you know where Lancaster is? And I said, yeah. He says, well, if you keep going till you get to Rosamond and then turn left, then you're, after a while, you'll run into Willow Springs. I said, well, that's interesting. He said, would you guys like a race course out there? I said, no, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, nobody walks in and says, how about giving you a race course? And I said, absolutely. I said, what do we have to do to put this thing together? He said, well, I need somebody to meet me out there at the property, and we'll go from there. And I said, well, is tomorrow too soon? And he said, no. And so I said, tell me more specifically where it is. He said, well, we're about, if you go out Highway 14, we're about 5 miles or so west, and you'll see I got a pickup truck, and I'll be there. I said, okay.
Roseman Boulevard.
Huh?
On Roseman Boulevard.
Is that what that was? Okay.
Yes,
all right. Roseman Boulevard. So I got hold of a friend of mine, John Hart, who was in between doing Lone Ranger and Hawkeye or something, and I said, John, you want to go out and take a look at some property for a race course? He said, absolutely. So we jumped in. I think I had an old, one of my first Porsches, and we.
Porsche?
Huh?
A Porsche? A
Porsche, and so we met. We were out there at the crack of dawn. Harold wanted to, he's an early riser. He said, could we be there by 8 o'clock? I said, yeah, I think so. Just, we'll go to bed. So we met him, and he said, well, it was nothing to look at. Here are these hills, and a barbed wire fence in front of us, and a gate. And he said, well, now our property goes over there to, he's kind of, you see that hill over there? He said, well, it goes over to that hill. Then it goes over there to that hill, and it goes up to that ridge up there. There's some scrub oak or something up there. That said, I think he said there's a spring or something up there.
Yeah, there was a
spring. I said, okay. He says, I got my pickup truck here, and it's full of stakes, and there's a hammer in the back, and why don't you guys go up and drive the truck up there or wherever and figure out how much of this land you want to make into a race course, and just kind of walk around. And I said, well, I'd never done this before. I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, okay. So I jumped in the pickup, And John got in with me, and we drove, and like, there's no road, this is just.
No, that's right, yeah.
You know.
There was nothing.
Nothing.
There was an old road that went out where the old mills stood.
Well, we
and that
drove,
was it.
and I
Yeah.
drove it up as far as I could go, till the truck just finally
Right.
started spinning wheels, and that was it. So that was the top of the
Turn
course.
4.
So I got out, grabbed a steak, and pounded the steak in, and I said, "This is the top of the course." And I felt like Sir Francis Drake or Vasco da Gama or something. You know. I mean, I have now proclaimed this land.
Yeah, as a race.
I mean, I don't know. So I just started walking. I mean, I had an eyeball with what the perimeter of of this land was. But I started walking, and I kind of followed some of the contours. And every now and then, I'd pound in a steak, and you know, I got all the way around. Then, when I got to the what would be the east end of the course, there was no way for me to make a radius of the turns, but I kind of just sort of staked it out.
Yeah.
And later on, you know, Harold got hold of some rope, which is a real fine engineering device.
Yeah, right.
And kind of dragged a radius. But we had a 600-foot radius. No, on the one big turn, which everybody hated me for, because it started out with like a 900-foot radius, and then it was briefly straight, and then went into a 600-foot radius. So you kind of
That's
sort of
like right?
like a button hook.
Yeah, right.
And people, you know, they get all set up in this big 900-foot radius turn, and just really having a ball, and all of a sudden, because everything would just, you know, it just all of a sudden slowly tightened up on them.
Yeah, that's right.
And the next thing they knew, they were out in the.
Well, that was
You know,
before, when you first come out around there, and then it went down that straightaway.
Yeah.
Did he have any of the, you know, he made a couple of, he was trying to make an oval racetrack when he started. Were some of the stakes there for that?
There wasn't any markings there.
Well, he wore that, I have an old picture of it. You know, he was pretty persistent when he went about things.
Yeah.
And he had marched around in a circle with his kids and some friends and had the same rope.
Okay.
And he made this circle up at, it was inside of turn 2. Well, no, it wasn't either. It was outside of turn 2. And the flat, he was dealing strictly with the flat.
Okay.
Yeah. That could have been how come the straightaway was in there.
Yeah.
Because that, where that button hook went in on turn 9,
That's right.
is where the straightaway comes down, and that would have been, see, that's all out in the flat part. Yeah.
Well, the straightaway was a nice straight.
Yes, uh-huh.
And so the next move was, after we had this thing kind of staked out, and Harold, you know, did some radius work to make sure that the turns
all the
were,
turns,
they made sense. Then he borrowed or stole a road grader somewhere. I don't know, you know, I mean a real live big grader with a big blade underneath it, you know, and he bladed this thing. And he bladed the whole, whatever it is, 1.8 miles. 2.5. Is it 2.5?
Mm-hmm.
2.5 miles, and
Graded it all.
graded it all, and then kind of looked at me like, well, okay, now it's your turn. So I'm thinking, boy, where do we go from here? And there was this friend of mine who was a member of the sports car club, and he was a nice guy, but he'd been married too many times. So he was already mentally.
Who was this?
His name was Fraser McMillan. And his father was, and I had met his father. His father owned the McMillan Ring-Free Oil Company.
Yeah.
And that was a very popular and
Big
good
name.
oil
Yeah.
at the time. His
McMillan
father was a
oil.
real crusty old Scotchman.
Mhm.
And Frazier was like the black sheep of the family. The father really didn't condone Frazier's, leaping in from one bed to another wedding, to another marriage, to another divorce. And at the time, I think Frazier was working a bar at some restaurant in Hollywood. And I told him, I said, is there any chance that we could get something, some kind of surfacing stuff from your dad? And he said, well, he said, let me check it out. So I guess his father thought maybe this will straighten out his son. And we got 2 tank loads of desert mix.
Oh, really?
And desert,
oil.
that's a really heavy oil that you kind of spray it on, it sinks in, you might mix it in a little bit, and then you roll it, and it's okay for very light traffic, not race cars. And so we're trying to get everybody out there to drive around this place. Well, I probably made more enemies at that time than I've ever any other time in my life.
Dusty.
You drove around in your nice little TC or MGTD, and you came in and there's oil all over everything. I mean, the whole underside of the car, everything.
Yeah,
And they're looking at me like, what in the world have you got me into? It was just awful. So I said, Harold, this isn't going to work. And he said, yeah. He said, let me see what I can do. So a couple of days later, I got a call, and we went back out there, and he had a real live steamroller, but it wasn't steam. It was like it had some kind of a big engine, but it had the huge big wheel up front, and the huge big wheel in the back, and you stood up. It had a tiller. You pushed it forward to go left, and you pulled it back to go right. It had a throttle, and that was it. And there was somewhere I don't think there was a brake.
Well, didn't it turn over?
I'm coming to that. So I said, I got to drive this thing. So I got in it. Yeah, I have. Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
So I got in it, got it running, and I put it, I think it had 2 speeds each direction. So I got it in whatever it was, and I drove it. It took forever because it's really slow. And I drove it, and I made it all the way to the top of the thing, of the course. And I thought, I'm not going to live long enough to make a circuit of this course. So I backed it up and turned it around, and then started to take it back downhill. Big mistake. Big mistake. And this thing, well, in the first place, the steering is in direct proportion to the RPM. And I'm going so slow, I can feel my beard growing, and I think I'm going to shift it. Big mistake.
You got it out again.
It's got gears that, came out of the Notre Dame Cathedral. This thing, when you took it, you don't shift while you're moving. You stop and make sure this thing is motionless. Then you take it out of whatever gear it is and you put it into another gear. But not while it's moving, because there is no such thing as synchromesh or a clutch. And so when I took it out of that gear and I'm moving, the engine immediately went to idle, so I have no steering. And it's trying to put it in gear. It's going ka-chunk, 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 and it's not going to go into gear. And now it's heading downhill. And I think, well, there are no women and children aboard, but I'm bailing out of this boat. And I just, I went right off the back end of it, because it was still moving pretty slowly. And it was starting to go towards the side of the track, where there was a small little culvert for drainage, I think. and it made it through and did this big, huge rocking and thing, and it's articulated in the front, so the front roller was going one way and the rear roller was going the other. It was a sight. And then it came up against a bank of dirt, and that's where I left it. I wasn't about to get back on that thing. And I walked from there, I walked back and I said, it's up on the hill. Somebody go get it. Anyhow, we rolled that, we rolled the course a lot with that. And then somebody found an 18-wheeler flatbed. And that was a pretty good thing to roll that
Yeah.
stuff with.
Uh-huh.
And eventually we got some kind of a course, but I think until they finally got rid of that Desert Vic, that was a dreadful, terrible misery.
He told me about that, Harold did. God damn.
Yeah, that was bad stuff.
They would mix that stuff over and over and over with the blade, you know, that old desert mix.
Yeah.
Well, when they put that thing, what was the first? They had a race and they had a bunch of old time, they weren't road racers, but they were popular racers. And it was before the Cow Club. The Cow Club, there was a Formula One car at the Cow Club race.
Hmm.
And he drove it around the track.
Oh,
as a kind of an
I did that.
Did you drive the car?
Grant Piston Rings.
That's right, yeah.
Grant Piston Rings had a.
Was that you in that car? For
Well,
Christ's sake.
that was me, and
I
it
have pictures.
scared the crap out of me.
Oh, Jesus Christ, yeah.
Well, the Grant Piston Rings bought a Ferrari. It was a front engine,
That's it.
and it was
Yeah.
it was for Indianapolis,
That
and
was
they
right,
got
yeah.
it here, and then they couldn't get it because Ferrari wasn't too thrilled about Grant entering a Ferrari at Indy,
Mhm.
but they were willing to sell him a car, but not parts.
Not be a part of it.
Yeah, they didn't want
Yeah.
anything to do with it, and
Mhm.
Grant couldn't get. They wanted a crankshaft. I don't know, some basic stuff, and
Mhm.
Ferrari wouldn't part with anything. So they were upset about it, and but there was nothing they could do. But they wanted the guy who was the general manager, and I can't remember his name, but he wanted us to hear the thing run and see it.
Well, we're trying to either sell it or promote some money for it,
Probably.
to take it and
So
race it.
we took it out. He asked me if I would drive it around Willow Springs. I said, I'd love to.
Uh-huh.
And so we took it out to Willow, and they had some cans. I think it ran on methanol, or I'm not sure.
What kind of an engine was it? Did
It
you
was a
ever-
12-cylinder.
I mean, who made the engine? Did they-
Ferrari,
Ferrari.
yeah.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful car, and I'd never been in a single-seater before, and it was exciting because like everything was right,
Andy.
it was just
Yeah.
right where you wanted it to be. It was,
Mhm.
and it fired right up. They put fresh plugs in it.
Well, when
The
I
battery.
bought it from Harold, he wouldn't remember Harry Morrow.
Of course,
Well, Harry Morrow had that Formula
3.
500.
Well, they called it Formula 3, but it was 500cc motorcycle.
Yeah,
Jack
motorcycle, right. Well, what did they call it? Formula Racing Association.
Okay.
That's it. So anyway, I was racing motorcycles. Wes Cooley came to me. The first race I had on it was a drag race. But then Cooley had the motorcycles, and what I did is I leased it from Harold. To start with, I leased it for $200 a month. And then I was putting these races on, the motorcycles, and then Harry came to me with the Formula Association, but they all wanted to get it paved, and I wasn't gonna pave it with it belonging to him, so
Sure.
it took me about 6 months of dealing with those there were 4 partners,
Right.
Richards and,
I never met the other guys. One of them had a motorcycle or a bicycle
That-
shop,
that was Joe Herb.
and there was a guy in San Bernardino.
And there was Joe Herb and Richardson and Matheson and the guy that owned the shoe store.
Okay, and Harold owned the X Motel.
That's right. Yes. But the
Big X.
The good one, Dick
Huge,
Richardson
big
was
X.
the one that.
Great name for a motel.
Remember when the guy run under the cable and the cable hooked him under the chin and pulled him out of a Porsche car? Do you remember that?
Oh, big.
That was in a lawsuit, that's why they were.
Well,
Dick Richardson told Harold Matheson that if they didn't get rid of that thing, he was gonna go out and pour gasoline all over it and set it on fire.
I think it was the Cal Club that put on a hill climb there.
Yeah, that was it, and
And there was this
Josie, von Neumann's wife,
adopted daughter.
was that what it was?
Yeah.
She said that it should be limited to, it's a killer racetrack and should be limited to hill climbs.
Well, they had this hill climb, and John von Neumann was there, and
Yeah.
it was one of the rare times I drove my own car, because I loved hill climbing. But Johnny's had a guest from Germany whose name was Huschke von Hanstein. And he was, and for years, like the director of public relations or product development or whatever, but he was a wheel in Porsche and pretty fast with the steering wheel.
Mhm.
And he set the fast time of the day, and I was second, and I was really
Yeah.
pissed off, because I figured this guy's a ringer, you know. He brought in
They
a
brought
pro.
him in and,
But then John called me, I remember vividly, Huschke had gone off somewhere to talk to somebody. John called me over and he said, I want to show you something. And he had pulled out an envelope, and he took these pictures out of the envelope that Huschke had given him. And they were all pictures of Porsches that had gone off to some in Switzerland or Italy and gone down 1,000 feet and rolled into a ball, and the driver lived.
Jesus Christ.
And John said he wants to use this for an advertising campaign. I said, John, no. He says,
Yeah,
right. He
show
says,
what he went
but how do
through.
I tell him?
Oh, man.
I mean, this was the Germanic idea, because, showing what a strong car it was. I said, that's not the message.
No.
The message is, you're gonna go off the road in this car. Boy, oh
Well,
boy. Yeah, he was,
They had a race on that Desert Mix, a stock car race. Well, that was in 55. 55, the first time NASCAR ever come to the West Coast. They ran at Willow Spring in 1955. And the track just disappeared,
it would.
and the dust.
Yeah, they went right through to the original desert.
Right, so everybody thought it was a dirt track instead of
Kind of dark blue dirt.
Was the Cow Club, when did the Cow Club become a part of the Sports Car Club of America? What year was that?
I think it was in the late 50s, early 60s, somewhere around in there.
Because I know when they were there, was it Riverside? Had Riverside been started, or was it still Cow Club when you went to Riverside?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was.
Well, when I got it,
I
that
know it was.
The Harry wouldn't, or,
But there was also, Harry had started a thing, and there was another.
Triple R.
Right.
I
Joe
raced with the, I'll never forget that, I raced with the Triple R. And Dick Connors drove the car, an Austin Healey. And I was sitting up on between the exit of 2 and 3, and I'm sitting up there, and I thought, boy, if a guy had this racetrack, he could really make some money. Oh, man. I bought it, well, I gave him a note on some property I had. I paid $115,000 for it. I gave him a note, I gave him $2,000, gave him a note on some property. I owned a speed shop and a muffler shop.
I remember Huth mufflers.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I had that in Lancaster.
Okay.
And my brother had the one in Burbank. So,
Well, I think I bought some Huth mufflers.
yeah, in Burbank.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So I buy the thing. Well, then I started dealing with Chick Vandergrift at the sports when he had the Hollywood sports car thing, and I made a deal with them to pave. I was going to pave it, and they wanted $16,000 to pave it, and I didn't have any money. So what I did, it took me about 6 months of fooling with all the different paving companies. So finally, they said, one guy said 50,000, all different prices. One was going to tear it all up and then redo it, do it. And I'm going to stop this thing. Go hear the tune. So, anyway, the guy, I phoned Marion Wright over in Little Rock, and he said, I'll be right over and look at it. And he brought his friend. Now, these people, some of them had never even finished the price, but they were all hot. So he drove over there, and he's got a wheel out, and him and Tony, a foreman for him, and we drive around the racetrack. And he measured at several places how wide it was. And then he says, I said, well, when can you tell me how much it's going to cost? And he says, in about 5 minutes. So I thought, well, by God, I'm finally getting someplace. So he says that's $16,000. So I said, well, when can you do it? And he said, Tuesday. So I said, okay. So I've gotten in a lot of scrapes, you know, when you owe, and I didn't have $14, $16. I had no money. So I'm standing there, and I go out there in the morning, and those asphalt trucks are clear out it's a half a mile long.
Yeah.
Oh, those trucks full of asphalt are all lined up in that thing, you know, on that road and out on the Roseman Boulevard.
Wow.
And I thought, man, you've gotten yourself in a lot of fixes. I don't know how this one's gonna work out.
How far is Mexico?
Oh, Jesus Christ. So they went ahead and paved. It took them 3 days. They could make it in one lap in about, I don't know, 6 hours or something. So he got all done, and he says, how do you like it? And I said, it really looks good. And he says, okay. I said, well, now we've got to make some arrangements on how I'm going to pay you. He said, well, just write me a check. And I said, I could write you a check, but it wouldn't be any good. So he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't have any money. I figured I could pay you so much a month. So he said, well, that's okay. He says, how much can you pay? And I said, I'll pay you $2,000 a month. Well, I stretched that out. So I went to the cow club, and they gave me $2,000 for an advance race, 2 advance races. It was $1,000 a race a weekend. And everybody now, they all want to get on it, but nobody wants to come up with any money. So I gave him the $2,000, but it came time for the next payment. And I said, this thing isn't going to give up, is it? So I said, I went to him and I said, Marion, I can't, you don't ever want to, if you owe somebody, just go see them.
Yeah.
You don't want to be ducking around and hiding from them.
No.
So I knew this, so I go there and I said, Marion, I can't make that. And he said, well, how much can you pay? How much could you really pay? Could you pay $200 a month? And I said, yeah, I could make that out of the muffler shop. So I did. I started paying him $200 a month. And I thought, well, what I better do is figure out how I can hold on to this thing and keep it and not be here. Because Riverside was growing.
Yeah.
And they had all that money. And so they're doing all kinds of stuff down there. Well, I can't hardly get the paving paid for, let alone, build buildings and everything. So Harry came to me and he said, do you want to sell this thing? And I said, no, I don't want to sell it, but I'll rent it to you. And the payments on the property were $400 a month. So that was $600 a month. And I said, okay. I said, I'll rent it to you for $600 a month. That's $200 you got to pay on the asphalt and $400 on the racetrack. So I wasn't making nothing, but again, I had it. So we made the deal, and I let him start running it, and he was plastered all the time. He'd come out there, he couldn't even find his way around on the goddamn racetrack. You know all this. But I loved Harry.
You talking Harry Morrow?
Yes. Man, he drank 13 goddamn pints of whiskey one day. Jesus. And this is
auto books.
Yeah, I know.
auto books. And he's running the racetrack, right? Oh, Jesus Christ. So anyway, he did, and I left and went back up into Montana and Wyoming and went back in the gambling business. And I'd been in the gambling business before, but I bought that muffler shop and quit. And then I thought, well, I got to make more money than this. So I went back to that, and I gave it to him for 15 years. And he made the payments, and everything went along okay, except did you know Wally Ward? You remember that? They had the Jim Russell driving school.
No.
Well, they came along, and that's kind of what saved him, because Wally was a good front for the racetrack. And he took care of business. But it's Jesus, I went through a lot of stuff. But it was okay, because when I took it back in 15 years, well, in fact, I extended the lease because Harry was really screwed up then. He was, it was pitiful. You remember where he lived over on Chandler?
Vaguely.
Yes, well, he was in the house, him and his wife, and he could barely get out of the house. He was drinking so much whiskey. And I let him keep it because he was so hung up, and he'd done good with it, with what he did. He didn't do much improvements, but he made all the payments and everything. And then he passed away. So then I took it back, and I got into lawsuits and over with the Kastner. They had a manager, he was supposed to manage it, and he had leases that I had never signed. But it took about a year to get it all leveled out, and then from then on, well, but it took off. When I went back there, I boosted it from, I think it had grossed $40,000 the year before. And I did 90 the first year, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And then I built the streets first. But I remember when that was all going on, when Riverside shut down. Well, there weren't any, because you couldn't get any land to build any racetracks or permits to build them. So, Walt Carter, remember Walt Carter with Riverside?
Yeah.
Walt Carter came along, and he was looking for land, and they were talking. He says, they're not going to build any racetracks, they're just talking. And so I said, well, I'm not going to get strung out with building another racetrack to make it more. So I said, I'll build a skid pad. And then they were running at Long Beach, the Grand Prix, the Formula Ones and that stuff. Well, I added onto the skid pad a square road, like a corners in a street. That's where I got the name of the street, Willow Springs.
Okay.
So I put that, and I paid for it, And then I built some more on it, and I paid for it, but I built it a piece at a time rather than getting tangled up like I had the first time. I wasn't getting that jackpot again.
When did you build the buildings? Because it was.
I built them in 1976, and that was the driving school, the Jim Russell driving school.
Okay, but then there's the other structures.
Well, then I built John Hartman and Hank Fernelli. I told you they paved the in and out, the hot pit lane.
Oh, okay.
And that was when Trans Am was just starting. And Hank said that we could get that race, get one of those Trans Am races. Never did have one. And then I finished that, and then that was a hell of a job to get started because nobody wanted to run on the goddamn thing. I got it done, and they didn't want to use it. Well, Kearney came out there, and he didn't use the skid pad, and he did all of his testing with these Eagle cars on the thing. And as soon as he got out there, everybody went out there. So then that one, now that streets racetrack, I think it really does better than the big track.
Really?
Yeah, it's busy. That thing is busy all the time. In fact, I wanna run cars on it, and I can't get any dates. Stephanie says we want to collect money. We don't want to pay money out. Every time I put on a race, first time remember Bill Bolt?
Yeah.
Bill Bolt came out. I put on a race where he wore a mask in the race because he was a Cow Club member. Jesus Christ. So everybody knows. So the first thing that happened was it rained. So when it rained,
It rained in Willow Springs?
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Well, so I canceled the race, but then it quit that day, so that I didn't cancel the race. I was doing business with the Bank of America, and the president of the bank he was an alcoholic. And if you asked him how far it was to some place, he'd say, well, take about a pint and a half. Jesus Christ.
That's funny.
Oh, so anyway.
That's funny.
He would give me money on Friday. I could write him a check, and I go have the weekend events and make some money and then pay him back, and everything was okay. So this race, this Bill Bolt deal, we have the race, and there's no people, and I didn't have any insurance. I never told him that. Jesus Christ. So we have the race, and I naturally lost. So I went into the bank Monday morning, and I put what I had in it. It wasn't very much, and he called a girl over, and he said, how much did he put in the bank? And I told her to ask her. I told him the Sweet to ask her how much.
Yeah.
So she said, and he said, Jesus Christ. He said, what happened? And I said, Sweet, it was a case of riot or fight. Jesus Christ. Oh, it had it, but it was always fun, you know.
I had a good time out there. I had one story that I love. I don't remember the race, but there was a good friend of mine who was a writer. He wrote an Academy Award movie called Mildred Pierce.
Oh, I remember that movie.
He had never written a screenplay. He came out from the East somewhere and went to work for whatever that studio was. And the first job, they said, well, here's this book, write a screenplay. And he wrote it, and he got Academy. He said, what's so tough about getting an Academy Award? You know? He never won another one. But he bought a little Ferrari, and just really excited about racing. And one day he's out there, and I'm out there helping him, and my brother, who's a photographer, is out there, and he's going around the various corners and shooting, and wanted to get some pictures. His name was the writer's name was Ronald McDougall, and really nice guy. And so Randy, as we called him, is tearing around the track in this beautiful little Ferrari, and he gets up over the top, comes down and right down at the bottom with this kind of a little corkscrew thing.
Mm-hmm.
He
Oh,
does
yeah.
something wrong, and this car goes upside down and turns around and lands on its wheels.
Oh, they drove out the front gate?
Well, you know, we said, well, weren't you terrified? And he said, you know, because we all saw what had happened. And he said, no, I'm going to be out here next week, and I'll show you, you know, not bothered, no, got to do a few things to the car. But he said, I just reached down and grabbed down the grab bar here, held myself down under the cowl, because we didn't have roll bars then.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I said, oh, wow, that sounds really neat. Well, little did we know that my brother had a picture of this car upside down, and Randy's hanging out of it like this. And my brother, the following week, handed Randy an 8x10 glossy
Of that.
of him hanging out of the car.
Jesus.
That was the last time he ever drove a car. I don't think he even rode a cab after that. I mean, he couldn't believe it.
More people come there in cabs that were drunk.
Oh.
For the club members of different clubs, you know, God damn, they come up and they just keep, and especially women looking for their husband. Jesus Christ.
Well,
Yeah, you know that is the oldest Willow Springs. I talked to Economaki, Economaki, and Willow Springs is the oldest racetrack west of the Mississippi. There used to be one, well, it's the oldest racetrack running, road racing circuit now on the American continent. But there was a racetrack back east that had one race that was built before it, and it was a kind of a half-road thing. But a lot of history.
Really?
And it's been good, and it's solid, you know, now it's,
Yeah, I understand it's
Yeah.
busy just about every day.
Every day. Which is, you know, when I first bought it, that was another thing. I didn't have races. I went to a meeting one time with Bill France and Les Richter and that Buddy Job that owned the Phoenix racetrack, and there were a couple more of them. And I'll never forget this. Well, Richter asked me to come down there, and he asked me. He knew what I was doing, but he couldn't figure out exactly what it was. But I didn't have any races, and I was making money. And so they're all talking, and this Buddy Job says, they asked me something, and I told him, and Buddy Job says, what are you doing here? He says, you never have any races up there. What are you doing down here at this meeting? And I said, I don't know really, but I said, I'm not in the red. Jesus Christ. I was baited off a testing. Jesus Christ. And it's been good, and now it's a big deal. You know what it all amounted to, Bill, was the insurance. The SCCA had Naughton. Remember Naughton? But before them, they had that other guy that had the, what was the name of the sports car club? They had under 1600, over 1600.
Right.
What was the name of that? Prototypes. He was a good friend of Danny on Gaius, this guy was. So I got insurance from Naughton. Well, when I got it, the SCCA forced me, he turned me down. So Harry Morrow, Harry didn't know what he was doing, but Harry was a good businessman, and he saw that K&K, the insurance now, and K&K was insuring only ovals. So Harry fooled around while he had that lease on the thing, and he got K&K to insure the thing. And they took a hold of it, and they've been, sometimes I think we must be their best. This thing goes every goddamn day.
Yeah.
This is like a weekly or a once a year, it's just going every day. Well, Repass told me that, he says that you're next to that for us paying insurance money. But I doubt it now because Jesus Christ, they've got how many races? 30, 40, almost every weekend. But every time it's kind of come out of it all right. But with the price of what the paving is now, did I tell you what they want to pave it now?
No.
$423,000. Just got a bid. $423,000.
Go ahead. See if they'll take 200 a month.
I'm not as risky as I was then. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's I'm amazed. Well, even when you said 16,000, I mean, you can't even do a driveway.
No.
A short driveway.
Well, I fixed a bump and turned on the streets in that Toyota Terrace area,
Mm-hmm.
and it was $30,000. They didn't go 200 feet.
Yeah.
And it's a shame.
The cost of
really.
construction and everything else is just.
Everything.
I know I added a porch on my house, and it cost as much as the house
That's
cost.
the whole house.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, yeah. Well, you know what's getting me now is did you notice the paint on the roads, how faded it is? You can't even see the lines anymore. And the state won't paint them because they won't stay.
I thought maybe it was my eyes.
I didn't. Shit.
What chart?
Oh, yes. You know, that's the stupidest thing. They build freeways through a state, and when they build a freeway through a state, they're just beating the state out of business. They go so fast anymore that they don't stop, and they can go 300 or 400 miles. It used to be you had to stop for water and, to keep the thing operating. Plus, they're making the roads wider. Already they can't furnish them enough money to fix them, and yet they still keep making them wider and straighter, and all they're doing is, what do you call it? A destination point. The object is to have a business that's a destination point, right?
Right.
Well, goddamn, those destinations are a thing of the past.
Few and far between.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, look what's happened. If you've seen Highway 5, when they first put it in, it was nothing from.
Nothing.
I mean, once you got north of Bakersfield or over the Gorman Pass,
You better check your gas.
you better make sure you have lots of gas and lots of food.
Yeah.
Because it was nothing for the next couple of 200,
Now
300
it's,
miles.
now it's getting
Now,
more
every
and
single,
more.
wherever they got an off-ramp now, they put in a gas station, and the next time you go by, there's a McDonald's, and the next time you go by, there's
You know
something else.
that little, Buttonwillow, where Buttonwillow is, that
Yeah,
little
that's-
area there turned into a little town, that little truck stops and all that stuff. But the one that really has done good is Buttonwillow. Or not Buttonwillow, Thunder Hill.
Don't know that.
Have you been up there?
No.
Well, Thunder Hill was a little town of Williams, was it? Not Williams, it was Willows.
Oh,
And funny how all that's Buttonwillow and Willows, but Willows is a little town on the Highway 5 freeway, right by Thunder Hill. That thing has turned into a big city. Not a big city, but it's a hell of a lot bigger than Roseman.
yeah, Roseman's.
And Roseman's growing, but Jesus Christ, it's tough to get people to come to races. There's so many things to do that I don't know how they get all those people to the motorcycle races in Europe and Japan and all that. They must have let them in for nothing.
I don't know. Well,
Well, we've got to worn it out, I guess.
I think we probably just about done it. Although, you know, I'm amazed at when I think of my first vision or sight of Willow, and I looked at this pretty barren piece
Yeah.
of desert. I thought,
Uh-huh.
wow, you know. And of course, the wind was blowing. That was another thing. And I asked Harold, I said, you know, when does the wind stop blowing? He says, what?
Honest to God, you couldn't
Well,
see.
probably, he said, about 5 years ago, it stopped for about 15 minutes.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, the wind blew just
Did
about
you ever
all the
walk
time.
along? I never seen ground that rolled like water.
Yeah,
It just, when you walk in it, it's just kind of puffy, and it kind of rolls along in front.
and I said, Harold, you know, like, what you really need to do, in fact, I even sketched it out, because he showed me where the spring was, where you had
Yeah,
there was a
right.
pump up there. I said, you need to put in some radius lines and get some little gallon cans of little pines or some kind of trees.
Plant 'em.
Because, boy, the nearest shade, when you're in Willow Springs, is
Oh,
about
man.
20 miles away at Palmdale.
And you know, the funniest thing is the trees that I planted, they don't take any water. They're desert pine trees. It's the goddamnest thing, and they just grew like hell. If they ever get any water, you can't believe it.
Yeah. So is that spring still there? Any water
Well,
out of
it was, until I drove a well by it.
Oh,
I went, it was the craziest thing. You'd think that you wouldn't want to drill a well for water on a mountain. You'd build it in the flats, right
Yeah.
where the water would be. I drilled one down on the road. Well, I drilled one in the back, 1,000 feet. It did nothing at 1,000 feet. I drilled another one on the racetrack, right in the pit area.
yeah,
Didn't get anything. Well, when I drilled the first ones, they didn't have anything that went through the rocks. But the one I drilled down on the road then went 1,000 feet, and I cut water out of it. But the guy that drilled, young kid, his name was Terry, I'll never forget, and he says, Bill, why don't you drill a well up on the hill? And I said, Terry, there ain't 1,000 foot here, it's 1,500 foot if I go up there. And he said, no, he said, the clay stops it in there.
hmm,
So I hired a guy, the well wisher,
yeah,
and the well wisher starts out all day long, and finally he came down and he says, I'll tell you where the water is. And I said, where is it? And he says, right behind that building up on the hill. He says, I sprayed the asphalt where to drill the well. I drilled the well, and I'm sitting down in the office and had them go out there, and it took all day the day before setting the equipment up. The next day, and it's in the morning, and I'm sitting in the office, and here comes the well driller, Terry, the kid that told me to drill it up there. And I said, what's the matter, Terry? Did the thing break down? And he said, no. He said, we've hit water at 100 feet. He says, we can't get even at 100 feet. And I said, well, then what does it take you to get even? And he says, 200. So I said, well, drill it 200. I wished I'd have gone 1,000 foot with that one, because it's been good ever since. Not only that, it's 175 foot, you know, Red the Grand, right?
yeah,
Well, it's 175 foot up that hill, higher on turn 4 than the straightaway.
right.
So I had about 140 pounds of pressure when the water got down at the bottom. Man, it's just, I just blasted out of the faucet. So
Wow.
Red said that, and he had so creepy well, and he says, "Can I attach to your water?" And I said, "Yeah, go ahead." So he did, and you know, he had that 2-story building he built. He could never take a shower up at the top of it because there wasn't enough water pressure from his well to push it up there. So he hooks on, and when we turned it on, it blew all those hoses off of the swamp coolers. The water was spraying everywhere. Oh, Jesus. He says, I don't give a shit. He said, turned all of them off, and he went up and took a shower. He said, God damn, that was neat. And I said, well, what are you going to do about the air conditioning? He says, I don't even give a goddamn about the air conditioning.
That's funny.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, that's crazy about the water.
Yeah,
water thing.
it is, really.
And
Now
those guys with the dowsers, they could.
They
I've seen
could
them work.
find it.
Yeah.
Yes.
They did a
Jesus
well.
Christ.
My mother. Yeah, my mother had some property up above Manning, and she built a cabin on it, and had this guy come up there and walk around with a stick, and he said, right there.
Isn't that
where-
funny? Yeah. Well, they showed me it is, and with 2 pieces of welding rod, and you could walk along with them things sticking out in front of you, and when you'd come to the water, they'd cross. Jesus Christ.
Hey, well, Bill, good to see you again.
Pleasure.
We lost an old friend, John Hart,
Yeah, that was,
not too long ago.
but you know, it took a long time for me to find out anything about that. When I knew that some way the Lone Ranger was into it.
Yeah.
And nobody really cared. You know, who gives a shit who built it or whatever.
He was starting to get Burl, his wife, said, well, you know, he remembers some things, but he didn't remember other stuff. But, you know, John was always a kind of a crazy ladies' man.
Well, they chased him probably.
For sure.
Nice look.
But he was 91 when he finally went. But I said, well, how is he doing? And she said, well, she says, I went in to wake him up the other morning, and he threw the covers back, and he says, jump in, my wife's asleep in the next room. Funny guy, yeah.
Christ.
Anyhow, I
Yeah, he
appreciate your
was.
coming down here, and we'll take it from there. So thanks very much.
It's a pleasure, really.
Now we'll put it on again.
Yes.
So hot rods?
I bought them, this guy got killed. But you know when they started racing on Muroc again just lately, maybe a few years ago, and a fellow by the name of Bruce Johnson got killed?
Yeah.
Well, I bought the first car I ever had. I bought a Model A, 29 Model A Roadster with a 34 Ford flathead in it. And I went at 93 miles an hour on it with it out there at Muroc. But most of the the racetracks were all quarter-mile ovals, and they had that old board track down around Santa Monica, but I used to go to the races all the time. I can remember remember Jim Jeffries, the fighter?
Yeah.
Burbank, yeah.
Well, Burbank was, you know, I sure missed the thing. When I was a kid, I hauled whiskey from Burbank to Idaho. And I had money. I was making really good money. And I went to buy that Jim Jeffries house was for sale. They didn't want anything.
Well, he had a boxing ring.
We had a boxing ring.
So I used to
out,
go
and he
there with my
had
dad and.
Yeah, he had a quarter-mile oval by the boxing thing. I remember we'd hang over the fence and watch some old cars, and one day a wheel come through the fence, and this lady just passed away a little bit, Margie Hagan, was hanging on the board that the wheel hit, and when it did, it flipped over, and she ended up inside inside the crash wall. She's inside laying on the ground. But it was really when we raced then, it was terrible. It was like a rally is now. You know how people go to a car rally and they'll just crowd in on the thing?
Yeah.
That's the way that was. I was racing on Glendale Boulevard, or Glen Oaks Boulevard, and what was his name? John Wade. It was John Wade and Jack Wade's brother, Floyd. and we were side by side, and he had a 36, so he had to get going so fast before, because my car was way less, so we had to get going about 60 or 70 before we could step on the gas. So when we go through these, all these people are coming in closer and closer, and when I went through that thing, I had stacks down the side, and I had moved over, and the stack scratched a big streak in a car. That's how,
Oh, wow.
man, it was dangerous, I mean.
Yeah.
And then after that, we'd fight. Oh, Christ.
Was that a car club?
Yeah, they had the rattlers and
Oh, I remember.
sidewinders, and there's a book that's out now that, well, been out for about 10 years, but they wrote a thing, and it was, remember a guy by the name of Kong Jackson? It was, well, Peterson was in this thing, I think. It wasn't Peterson. Who's the guy who's the national hot rod guy?
Wally Parks.
Wally Parks it was Wally Parks and Charles Jackson and Ed Iskandarian and myself. And they made a book for the archives of Edwards Muroc Dry Lakes. It's about that thick, it's a hell of a book, but it was all about the different people that are, I never knew until they started in that thing, but those big car companies used to go out there and run their cars on that Muroc Dry Lake.
You see commercials all the time that you know that's what.
Yes, yeah.
Did you know Harold Day back then?
Who?
Chuck Day's brother?
Harold Day.
Yes. Yeah, God, there was some Bob Rupai, do you ever hear that name? Bob Rupai had a 4-cylinder Chevy with an Oldsmobile 2-port head on it, and he went 143 miles in 1939.
Wow.
That was something else, with a belly tank off of a bomber.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of, what was the Packard Car Company? There was one of them kids, and he got tangled up with the drugs really heavy, and he'd go into their studios over in Hollywood and rev his car up and make a lot of noise with it, and I think he just died, though. He never got killed, but he raced out there a lot. There were a lot of famous people. It was pretty handy, really. When they bombed us to get us off of it, they put bomb holes all over it, and we were still racing, and we were leaving. And when you left, when it broke up, everybody just took off all different directions. Well, the reason was one Sunday, I think there's like 15 people got killed. I mean, it was something else. It was terrible. Yeah, on the one guy goes out, these guys show up at night. They had a 36 Ford and a 32 Ford Roadster. They're towing it with the 36. They stop, and they don't do anything. They start the 32 up, and they took off across the dry lakes, and you can't see anything. They got headlights, but you can't see very far with them. They get out, and they're going around and turning donuts out in the middle of the racetrack on the dry lakes. And all at once, they wound off, and then the guy shifted into second, and he was almost where he's going to shift into third, into high, and it crashed. They ran into their own goddamn car, and the one guy sailed through 2 windshields. Didn't kill anybody. Broke the guy's arm, but that was about it. But that was the kind of stuff that happened. They'd run off of that lake so much, you know, in the sagebrush, and wherever there's a sagebrush, there's a clump of
I know.
bump, you know. So you'd just start flopping over.
I shot a commercial out there, and there were these guys with these 3-wheel wind, I don't know what you'd call them. They were like
Oh, I know what you mean, a
dry
sail.
land sailboats.
Yeah, right, with wheels on
With
it.
wheels on them, and they would,
I got
and they
some
would be going through
pictures.
those clumps that you turn.
Yeah.
But they could go, you know, what they get on a
Yeah.
reach, they could probably go 60 or 70 miles an hour.
Jesus
And they'd
Christ.
lift up a wheel and, you know, it was, and I was driving this, a 600 Mercedes, you know, one of the, not a limo, but it was a stretch
Mhm.
thing with, it had a 12-cylinder in it with all kinds of systems, vacuum systems. You could never be sure whether the doors were gonna be closed, or, it was just the most god-awful conglomeration. You know, you'd be flying along and all of a sudden, you'd hear the wind noise, because the doors had all of a sudden opened up. Terrible car. But those guys, you know, they didn't pay, they were just, if they were on a tack, then they weren't gonna move, like, you better get out of there.
Yeah,
'cause
right.
they got the wind and they're gonna, but those clumps that you mentioned, I remember seeing those, and
Yeah, all
we had
of those
we had
little clubs, they were all over LA.
Yeah, we were shooting this commercial of a Ford truck that was supposed to jump over this Tom T. Hall, this Western star.
I remember that guy.
And
yeah.
it was supposed to stop right here, and then he would point out all the good things that this truck had. So we had 3 trucks, and one had all the bottom painted out of it, and we had a crane that would do this, and we had ramps. But we would first jump the one truck to get the jumping thing, and then we do
Hang
that
it up
thing.
there.
My job was I was the money guy, so I would be running back in LA and get stacks of 50s and stacks of 20s and screaming back and forth in this Mercedes to pay off this guy and that guy, and get all these guys that only took cash.
I love that.
This guy, the
Jesus
producer,
Christ.
was kind of sort of my partner. He hired 2 guys that had just been released from Chino State Prison, who had been working in what do you call them, a chop shop, where they take cars apart.
Yeah.
Because we had to take a truck apart and paint all the underneath stuff and then put it all back together. Well, give these guys a couple of air guns. They had that truck, they had it all laid out on the front lawn in 2 hours. I mean, you never saw a truck. This truck just started settling like it was slowly sinking into sand. And stuff was flying off it. I mean, suspension parts, mufflers parts, you know, tailpipes, a catalytic converter, boom, boom. I never saw anything come apart faster in my life.
Jesus Christ.
But they know, I mean, that's all they've been doing for probably 2 or 3 years till they
You
got
know,
busted.
they used to bring a lot of those cars out there, they'd bring the bodies out with no wheels, well, they'd had them.
Yeah.
But they'd sell everything off of it out at the dry lakes at night, and then they'd be sitting there on the racetrack the next morning.
But that Muroc dry lake, to drive around on it, it's kind of wild.
Well, you know it is, and it's pretty easy to get lost on it.
Yeah,
You couldn't, Jesus Christ.
yeah.
I went out that El Mirage, you know, they're still running on El Mirage. But God, there's stuff sailing through the air, them little not hang gliders, but those gyro things that they speed along and
Oh, yeah,
things turning on its own.
right.
Jesus Christ. I lived there in the north side of Roseman Boulevard by that little Fox airfield.
Oh, okay.
Boy, it seemed like once a month there's a guy getting killed with those little.
I knew there was something I wanted to mention to you. I had my grandson go out there and take the driving thing with the Russell, was it Russell or somebody?
Jim Russell.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out he moved to New York, went to NYU, and now doesn't even have a car, but that figures, right?
That's right, yeah.
But also, Dick Messer, who's the head honcho here at the Peterson Museum, he has a daughter, or I'm sure he still does, but she was having some kind of problems at school. She wasn't a good student, and I don't know what it was. I think it was a self-esteem problem, as he said. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but he took her out there and had her take that course. And it changed her whole personality.
Isn't that something?
And all of a sudden, she is
just took a hold of
went
it.
to 2 grade points up, and really got
Yeah.
excited about school and doing things, because she found something that she could do, and they put her on the skid pad, and they did all that.
Yeah.
And I think every kid, everybody that's going to want to learn how to drive ought to take
Should
that
go
course.
to those schools. Well, when you go to get a driver's license, the main thing, main thing they want you to do is know how to park.
Exactly.
Not any car control, none of that stuff. I have
And with all of the, one of the things they brought out at the Russell School, which I thought was really good, because I never thought about it, but all the cars now have this ABS, this automatic braking system. But nobody you can drive a car for 5 years and never ever use the ABS and never know what it feels like.
That's right.
And the only time it's going to react is when you're in a really bad situation.
Push down.
And that's not when you want something strange going on. I thought that was a pretty damn
Well,
good
it
point
is,
with Russell,
yeah,
because what
right.
they could do is on that skid pad, they could slam on the brake, and you could feel the whole car shuddering. So you knew what that was, and so if you got into a bad situation.
Well, now, when you use those brakes going down the hill and they get hot, and now they start chopping then without having to put the brake on too much, and you can feel it in action.
Well, I probably don't, I just shift down.
Yeah,
I'm an old race car
but they
driver.
do that. It's bad for that, but if you know what's going on, but like you say, Jesus Christ, they don't teach them, what they need to know is car control.
Well, let's wrap this up, and I think that you got enough information to keep you busy.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.